Hello everyone. In this video, we will be discussing how genocide actually proves God's goodness. This may seem like an outrageous title, but stick with me and I will explain. Genocide is a very horrific event. There are many atrocities and abominations committed, and many lives become lost. Deliberate killings, forced displacements, and dehumanization are all exceedingly gruesome results of genocide. Genocide is nothing to speak unknowingly about and without care. Genocides like the Holocaust, Armenian, Cambodian, Rwandan, Bosnian, and Darfur genocides are extremely horrendous and degrading to the human value. It is very catastrophic to humanity, and all people feel this way. Everyone has this hatred and injustice towards these types of incidents. We believe that it is objectively wrong and feel a dreadful distaste in our hearts. But why do humans even feel this way? Why do humans believe that genocides are objectively wrong? All humans have some moral code ingrained in their hearts. Humans collectively agree that murder, stealing, and abuse is wrong. Though some people do commit these horrendous crimes, they often purposely go against their moral code by using their own ability to make choices. Besides, these acts could possibly be appealing to some people. So how then can we decide morality? Maybe the collective agreement of humanity and society? Well, that can't be it, because people have allowed slavery for thousands of years, and often people follow what their governments enforce out of fear. For example, the Nazi regime in the 1930s and 40s. This proves that humans can be collectively wrong morally, so morality can't be set through power or human agreement, but something more transcendent, like God. People as a whole understand what's bad, from shootings, killings, natural disasters, genocides, and more. To understand bad, though, means there's a defined good. Good things may include giving to the poor, curing a disease, speaking kind words, and just going out of your way to help others. Everyone agrees that these are all good acts of kindness, and generally they are rewarded rather than shamed upon. This proves an evil God doesn't exist, because good deeds are generally better rewarded than bad deeds. Also, as I discussed earlier, people have a hatred against extremely evil occurrences like genocides. However, if this universe was purely biological, evolutionary, and materialistic, people shouldn't technically feel this way, because technically, these people are just asserting their role as a predator and living out the principles of survival of the fittest in their lives. If that was so, genocidal suffering would just be a biological process and nothing more. Of course, this is completely insane thinking, because humans naturally have this moral obligation to protect lives, not destroy them like animals do. Therefore, the claim that God doesn't exist because there's so much suffering in the world doesn't actually work, since in an atheistic reality, suffering isn't technically a bad thing, since people would just be living out the evolutionary process, since survival of the fittest would be the dominant biological law in the land. However, you may ask, why does a good God allow evils like genocides? You may say if God is benevolent and wants to stop all evil, and he's also omnipotent and has the power to stop evil, why doesn't he just stop evil like genocide? First of all, I would say we can't actually limit God to these premises, because yes, he is all-loving, but he is also omniscient and all-knowing. If we were actually to know God's mind, that perspective might change. For example, There's a story of the Chinese bomber whose horse runs away. His neighbors say that's bad, but the horse returns with more horses. His neighbors say that's good. His son then breaks a leg. His neighbors say bad, and then the son aboards a war draft, which is regarded as good. After every event, the bomber says maybe. This story shows that events aren't really bad or good until you wait it out or gain more further knowledge. Now, applying the story to genocide would seem to be insane and idiotic. However, we can generally take the principle of saying maybe to show God's reasoning. Besides, God's knowledge is much more higher and transcendent than any of our limited minds. Since God is omniscient, He knows every possible outcome and result. Hypothetically, 1,000 lives could be lost, but millions of lives can be saved from that. Also, personal moral character change is an important factor. God knows what it will take to develop our character, increase our reliance on Him, and help us realize what's actually more important. Also, genocides happen because people abuse their free will and commit horrendous choices. If God were to prevent that, then we wouldn't really have freedom, and we wouldn't be able to make decisions for ourselves. We would be slaves being programmed to do actions a certain way, like robots. Thankfully, we do have the ability to make choices, to do good or bad deeds, to accept God or not. You might also ask why God doesn't intervene more to stop genocidal maniacs or horrible natural disasters or diseases. Firstly, we know that God doesn't often prevent humans from making choices. He has the love to give us liberty to perform actions and allows us to learn the consequences of said choices. Secondly, it is apparent that we live in a fallen world. This happened because humanity decided it didn't need God. The sad effects of this fallen world are events like natural disasters, disease, famine, and more. God doesn't often intervene and stop these because He wants us to realize the effects our sin causes, which is eventually death. You may say you're a relatively good person, undeserving of suffering. Some may even look at the world and say, if God exists, then I don't like the way He runs the world, and I would be a better judge than He is. But those people don't even recognize the arrogance and hypocrisy they are in. They claim to be the ultimate judge of the world, yet no mind is perfect. We are all filled with selfishness, and even our most righteous acts are dirty rags compared to God. If life was perfect, with no suffering, then we as humans would never appreciate anything at all. We would all take pleasure and happiness for granted as a given. We would never even turn our heads to the loving God who would have created this reality. We would disregard our need for God, which was exactly what happened when the first humans rebelled against Him. Also, if we were just to love God for just the things He gives us and what pleases us, instead of for His character and what God actually is, then that would just make us more selfish, and that wouldn't actually represent a true loving relationship. You may ask, why do we need God so much? That's because He created us with a loving intent to relate with us, never stopping at His goal. He created us with a heart to love and to devote, but we often direct our attention and devotion to other idols and distraction because of our own free will and our choices. Why wouldn't we depend on the one who deeply cares for us and created us in the first place? This leads me to my next point, that suffering and death in this life are less heartbreaking and disappointing when compared to the glorious afterlife in heaven. I'm not saying suffering doesn't count for nothing. Genocide especially drastically shifts a person's life. It may result in death, and for survivors, trauma and grief. Though, With eternity on the victim's mind, he knows everything will be put to right and has trust that God has a plan for him. Suffering, while horrible, helps us appreciate life in a more deeper and intimate way. If your mind is focused on God, then your perspective on suffering changes entirely. While we will never know why God allows evils like genocide, we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. But how could we ever have hope during a genocide? This is what is so good about God's goodness. He didn't just leave us in our suffering, but actually came on this earth and suffered for us. He allows us to dwell in Him, in our suffering, so that we can have hope and joy through God. God sent His Son, Jesus, to come and die on the cross, taking on the sins of the world and defeating death itself for those who believe in Him. We could never defeat sin on our own, nor delay the day of departure. I honestly believe that God does feel for us and understands our cry for help during our hurt. God is close to those who are crushed in spirit, and those whose hearts are broken from the evil and corruption of this world. Christianity best explains the problem of evil more than other world views, because God suffered for us on the cross and will make everything right when it's all said and done. Dwelling among us, He will wipe away every tear from our eyes and will make everything new.